The world has always been divided into two kinds of people: those who move power and those who are moved by it. You feel this division long before anyone explains it to you. You walk into a room and somehow disappear. Meanwhile, someone else enters and the air shifts. They don't speak loudly. They don't explain themselves. Yet attention bends toward them. Opportunities follow them. Respect arrives unannounced. And you do everything you were told would work. You work harder. You stay competent. You stay kind. Still, you are overlooked. You start asking the wrong questions. Why isn't my talent enough? Why isn't my goodness rewarded? You're told this is about confidence, about charisma, about luck. But history tells a different story. You've been taught that connection is about authenticity, about being liked. That advice was written by people who already had power. Powerful people do not need more friends. They need assets. If you want access to the rooms where real decisions are made, something in you must die first. The part that seeks validation. The part that asks permission to exist. Over 5 centuries ago, Niccolo Machiavelli noticed something uncomfortable. Power does not respond to virtue alone. It responds to usefulness, perception, and control. He didn't invent these patterns. He recorded them, after watching empires reward some people and quietly erase others. In this series, we are not studying laws as ideas. We are watching them reveal themselves in history. Each episode takes one principle Machiavelli identified and shows how it played out in real lives, real courts, real failures, and real survival. Because once you see how connection truly worked in history, you start to understand why it works the same way today. But understand this before we continue. Once you see how connection truly works, innocence is gone. You cannot unsee the strings. Most people fail because they approach power with an open hand, asking. They mistake visibility for value. The question is not whether this feels uncomfortable. The question is whether you are ready to understand it. Because before you can grasp the void, the silent space where influence is created, you must first understand the 13 laws that govern it. Law 1. Never outshine the one who grants you access. You don't fall because you failed. You fall because you made someone above you feel replaceable. History shows this clearly, with names. Look at Thomas Wolsey, the most powerful advisor to Henry VIII. Wolsey was brilliant. He managed foreign policy, controlled appointments, negotiated treaties, and effectively ran England. For years, his competence made the kingdom function. But over time, something dangerous happened. Foreign leaders treated Wolsey as the real authority. Courtiers went to him before they went to the king. His influence became visible, independent. Henry VIII didn't remove Wolsey because he was incompetent. He removed him because Wolsey's prominence made the king look secondary. The moment Wolsey failed to deliver a political outcome Henry wanted, protection vanished. He was stripped of power and died disgraced before he could even face trial. Loyalty didn't save him. Service didn't save him. Visibility destroyed him. Now look at Renaissance Italy, the world Niccolo Machiavelli watched closely. Machiavelli observed that advisors who survived longest were not the most talented, but the most careful. They framed their successes as the ruler's insight. They let praise flow upward. Their intelligence was felt, not displayed. Those who failed to do this didn't receive warnings. They simply lost access. This pattern repeats again with Nicolas Fouquet, advisor to Louis XIV. Fouquet built wealth, influence, and prestige, and then made the fatal mistake of displaying it openly. His lavish estate and public admiration made Louis XIV feel eclipsed. Within weeks, Fouquet was arrested and imprisoned for life. Not for theft, not for betrayal, but for outshining the king. Now look at your own world. You enter a system to help. You contribute. You solve problems. At first you're welcomed. Then recognition shifts to you, and tension follows. Power doesn't ask whether you meant well. It asks whether you've become a threat. History teaches this without emotion. Once you understand this, you stop mistaking recognition for safety. You begin to see why so many capable people disappear right after they peak. Law 2. Conceal your true ambitions. If people know exactly what you want, they don't have to guess what to block. History proves this with names, not theories. Consider Julius Caesar. Early in his career, Caesar did not openly declare his ultimate ambition. He presented himself as a loyal servant of the Roman Republic, a general, a reformer, a man restoring order. His rise was quiet enough that rivals underestimated him. By the time the Senate fully understood his intentions, he already controlled armies, loyalty, and territory. Now compare that to Marcus Junius Brutus. Brutus made his political convictions obvious. He openly aligned himself with the preservation of the Republic and resisted Caesar publicly. His intentions were clear. And because they were clear, they were anticipated. Brutus was watched, constrained, and ultimately trapped in a political reality he could not escape. The difference wasn't morality, it was concealment. Caesar advanced because his ambition was felt, but not declared. Brutus failed because his ambition was announced and therefore managed. You see the same pattern centuries later with Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon did not initially present himself as a future emperor. He framed his rise as service to the revolution, then as protection of France, then as necessity. Each step appeared temporary. Each ambition was disguised as duty. By the time Europe recognized the scale of his intent, he was already crowned. Those who opposed him early, loudly and visibly, were removed early. This is the lesson history keeps repeating. When your ambition is obvious, people don't wait to see if you succeed. They act preemptively. Now look at your own life. When you tell people exactly what you're aiming for, watch how behavior changes. Support becomes conditional. Advice becomes caution. Doors slow down instead of opening. You see it? Nothing about your goal changed. Only its visibility did. Machiavelli didn't say this because he admired secrecy. He observed that clarity of ambition invites resistance long before power is secured. So history teaches you this quietly but firmly. You don't hide ambition because it's wrong. You hide it because timing matters. And once you understand that, you stop announcing your destination. You let people discover it only when your position makes it unavoidable. That is not deception. That is how power has always moved. Law 3. Appeal to self-interest, never to mercy. If you ask power to care about your situation, you're already losing. History is blunt about this. Consider Christopher Columbus. Columbus did not convince the Spanish crown to fund his voyage by appealing to sympathy or passion alone. He did not say, "Believe in my dream." He spoke in terms of gold, trade routes, and expansion of influence. He framed his proposal as an opportunity for Isabella I of Castile to gain wealth and power. That is why the crown listened. They were not moved by his courage. They were moved by what they stood to gain. Now look at the opposite case. Thomas More stood before Henry VIII, appealing to conscience, tradition, and moral duty. More believed loyalty and righteousness would protect him. He believed mercy would outweigh inconvenience. It didn't. Henry VIII did not execute More because he hated him. He did it because More's stance threatened the king's authority. Mercy offered nothing in return. Self-interest demanded removal. That contrast matters. Power does not ignore suffering because it is cruel. It ignores suffering because suffering does not solve its problem. Machiavelli observed this clearly. Rulers are surrounded by need. If mercy guided decisions, power would collapse under obligation. So it develops a filter. What benefits me? What stabilizes my position? What strengthens control? Now bring this back to yourself. When you approach someone powerful and explain how much you need them, notice how the conversation stalls. They may sympathize, they may nod, but nothing moves, you see? You didn't give them a reason to act. History shows that those who gained protection, resources, or access did so by aligning their request with the other person's advantage. They didn't say, "Help me." They said, "Here's how this helps you." Once you understand this, your approach changes. You stop explaining your struggle. You start identifying their interest. Law 4. Make your presence valuable and your absence felt. What is always accessible is rarely respected. You assume people value you because of what you contribute. History shows they value you because of how often they can reach you. If people can reach you whenever they want, they don't have to value you. Look at Elizabeth I. Elizabeth ruled in a world where authority was constantly tested by nobles, foreign powers, and even her own advisors. She could not rely on brute force alone, so she mastered something quieter, control of access. She did not rush audiences. She did not respond immediately. She allowed silence to do part of the work. Foreign ambassadors often waited weeks for replies. Courtiers were never sure when they would be received. Even those close to her did not assume availability. This uncertainty wasn't accidental. Elizabeth understood that immediate access lowers importance. When she finally appeared, attention sharpened. When she spoke, it landed. By making herself slightly unreachable, she forced others to organize themselves around her time, not the other way around. Her presence became an event, not a routine. See how this applies to you. When you say yes without pause, when people assume you'll always be there, your value becomes invisible. Elizabeth's rule shows that power is reinforced by restraint, not by neglect, but by boundaries. Her absence created anticipation. Her return created authority. Once you understand this, you stop confusing responsiveness with relevance. You realize that being needed is not the same as being accessible. History makes it clear. Law 5. Mirror the world view of those above you. People trust those who see the world the way they do. You think connection is built by sharing your ideas. History shows it's built by understanding theirs. This law becomes clear when you look at Charles Maurice de Talleyrand. Talleyrand served under the French monarchy, survived the French Revolution, advised Napoleon Bonaparte, and later worked with the restored monarchy again. Regimes rose and fell, ideologies clashed, yet Talleyrand remained indispensable. Why? Because he did not challenge how powerful men saw the world. He entered it. With monarchs, he spoke the language of stability and tradition. With revolutionaries, he spoke the language of necessity and order. With Napoleon, he framed ideas in terms of empire, legacy, and control. He understood something simple. People in power don't want to be corrected. They want to be confirmed. When someone speaks in their worldview, their assumptions, their metaphors, their priorities, trust forms quickly, almost unconsciously. Rulers favored those who seemed like them. Now bring this to your own life. When you speak to someone powerful, notice what happens when you challenge their perspective too early. Even if you're right, resistance appears. Walls go up. Access shrinks. But when you acknowledge how they see things, even temporarily, the tone changes. Conversation softens. Doors open. You see it? This is why those who mirrored worldview rose faster than those who insisted on expression. Not because they were dishonest, but because they were perceptive. Once you understand this, you stop leading with your conclusions. You start listening for how others frame reality first. And when you speak, your words land, because they sound like they belong. Power doesn't reward originality first. It rewards recognition. And history has always favored those who knew how to reflect before they reshaped. Law 6. Control the flow of information. Those who know first, move first. History shows that the people closest to power are not always the strongest or the loudest. They are the ones who see clearly before others do. Look at Clemens von Metternich. Metternich was not a king. He commanded no armies. Yet for decades, he shaped European politics after the fall of Napoleon. His influence came from one source: information. He built vast networks of diplomats, informants, and correspondents across Europe. He read letters before others did. He knew which revolutions were forming, which alliances were fragile, and which leaders were lying to themselves. Rulers listened to him, not because he demanded authority, but because he consistently knew more than they did. Centuries later, the same pattern appears with J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover didn't hold elected office, yet presidents feared him. Why? Because he controlled files, reports, and surveillance. He decided what information moved upward and what stayed hidden. Leaders depended on him to understand threats they could not see themselves. Do you see the pattern? Those who controlled information became indispensable. Those who relied on it became dependent. When you become the one who understands what's happening before others, when your insight saves someone time, reputation, or effort, you stop being optional. Law 7. Bond through shared opposition. Nothing aligns people faster than a common enemy. This becomes clear when you look at Octavian, Augustus. After the assassination of Julius Caesar, Rome was fractured. No single figure held enough trust to dominate alone. Octavian was young, inexperienced, and underestimated. He aligned himself with Mark Antony and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, not because they trusted each other, but because they shared a common enemy: Caesar's assassins. As long as the enemy existed, the alliance held. Once the enemy was removed, the bond dissolved, and power reorganized. Octavian survived that transition because he understood the law better than the others. The alliance wasn't built on friendship. It was built on direction. Once you understand this, you stop trying to bond through similarity alone. You listen to friction. You've now watched the first 7 laws reveal themselves, not as theory, but as patterns history repeats with precision. In part 2, we go further. Laws 8 through 13 expose how power is maintained once access is secured, how dependence is created, and how choices are controlled. If part 1 showed you how people enter the room, part 2 will show you who remains when the room turns cold. And if this changed how you see connection and power, subscribe, not for content, but so you don't lose the thread. If one of these laws made you uncomfortable, leave a comment. History usually unsettles before it clarifies. Part 2 is where the patterns become impossible to ignore.